And so that's why I'm going to interview some people up here. I want to ask them to come up because the goal of this is to give you information that's cutting edge, that's new. It's to pique your interest, and I hope to help you in your own life and in the life of those you care about. So I want to, and the people here today are the best of the best. They're experts. They can give you cutting edge information. So Dr. Ian Robertson, I'm going to ask Ian to come up. He's a neuroscience clinical psychologist. He's at the Dallas Center for Brain Health. He and I have done this before. He's also the director of global brain health in Dublin, Ireland. Farida Sohrabji, I'm really excited to be speaking with her. She's a neuroscience at Texas A&M, professor at the medical school, and focuses on sex differences. And this is a huge space, not just for Alzheimer's, but for all research, because very little, by the way, when it comes to prescription medicine and everything else, is done on women. So that's a big pet peeve of mine about how little is done on women. Moll Anderson, who is a friend but also an activist, I want to start by that, doing a daughter herself of Alzheimer's, became a caregiver, so knows what that's like firsthand, has learned a lot, and has information that she can share that can benefit anybody else who is in that space. And Cheryl Action Jackson, who is also a daughter and a granddaughter of Alzheimer's, and told me today that in preparation for this, she started researching, Alzheimer's and how little she knew about its impact in the African American community, where it's double, and how she wants to now be involved in helping us spread this message to minority communities who get very little information and very little attention on this from doctors. So I want to thank all of them for being here. I guess I'm going to stand. Is there a chair? Good. Okay, so I'll just stand. Yeah. No, it's fine. I do this for a living anyway, so it's fine. So I want to begin with you, Farida, and you specialize in sex differences, and I want to ask you what you think is the reason that women are so vulnerable to this disease and why so few of them know it.
So I'm delighted to be here. I'd like to start with that. And I'm going to actually confirm what your film showed, and that is we really don't know. But here is my best guess and what the research tells us. One of the reasons that women might be at more risk, not only for Alzheimer's disease, but also for other neurologic conditions such as stroke, such as multiple sclerosis, is probably because of the role of ovarian hormones, specifically estrogen, progesterone. And so at menopause, when these hormones are not produced in the same levels, the protection that estrogen gives women is now no longer present, and that leads to the increase in the diseases we are seeing. Unfortunately, that's not the whole story, because if it were, hormone therapy would take care of it, and it doesn't. So we know that the loss of hormones is important, but simply replacing with hormones won't do it.
But I think this is, for me, was an incredibly interesting thing, because when I became perimenopausal, nobody asked me about my cognitive health. Actually, no doctors ever asked me about my cognitive health. And in traveling around the country and in funding this research, I started asking, most women think taking estrogen is bad for them, but now everywhere I'm going, I'm being told it's a neuroprotector. So I'm sure that there is every woman here who has to make this decision for herself. And obviously, if cancer runs in your family, that's a different part of it. But most researchers I talk to say far too many women are taking estrogen, and more should, because it does change your brain.
Correct. So the current wisdom is that women who are perimenopausal and are considering hormone replacement and are not at a risk for cancer or not at a risk for very advanced cardiovascular disease, so that high incidence of stroke and heart attacks runs in your family, those individuals could actually consider hormone replacement, and it's actually quite safe for them. It improves your bone health, it improves the functioning of your liver, your skin. There's really very good evidence on that. Where the evidence breaks down is if you haven't considered hormone therapy at perimenopause and you've waited 10 years or 15 years, taking estrogen at that point is risky. That's what the Women's Health Initiative told us, is that don't go through a period of estrogen deprivation, because the body is now learning how to cope without it. And when you come at it with these other pharmacological levels, very high levels, you see off-target effects.
So many women I talk to say, they're beginning to hear this sort of thing, but they go to their doctors and they're constantly told, it's kind of up to you. We don't really know, which leaves women kind of, once again, as I said, kind of their own doctor or in charge of their own health. And how do we get more doctors to actually be able to be advocates and assets to us when we go in to talk about our changing health?
So I'm doing my little bit to that.
Okay.
I teach medical school students, and one of the things I do is I literally shoehorned my way into the curriculum, and I give an hour-long lecture on sex differences in neurologic disease. And the idea there is that when you first have your patient come into your clinic, the first thing you're going to tell is whether it's adult or a child. But the next thing I'm going to bet is whether it's a male or a female. And the minute you notice that, shouldn't there be a very different script that goes through your head about what you're going to talk to this person about? And so I think educating physicians is going to be a priority over here. But I think you're very right when you say an informed patient is the best advocate. And so making yourselves aware of what is known about this literature. The NIH, which funds research in this country, has a publicly available database. It's called PubMed. You can Google it and get there and look at what research is available. There may be a nominal fee in some cases, but if you write to me, I will send you that article for free, okay? So inform yourselves. When you go to your doctor, make sure that you tell them what risks run in your family, and then be very candid about what's wrong with you. Don't minimize your symptoms. This is one of my pet peeves. Women tend to underrepresent pain, okay? Not talk about issues that we think are just sort of socioculturally not very acceptable. So for example, depression. We think of Alzheimer's as being a memory loss issue. Of course it is. But there is also depression. In fact, depression comes in early. Don't minimize it. If you're sensing depression, talk to your doctor about it. These are precursors.
So that's also, I think, I'd like to move to Ian, because I think very few people understand the correlation between depression and anxiety, and women are twice as likely to be depressed. They have more anxiety, and that puts them on a fast track, as does diabetes, to Alzheimer's. Ian, what are we learning about the correlation between depression, anxiety, and Alzheimer's, and what is the best remedy starting now?
Well, as Farida said, some of the earliest manifestations of Alzheimer's disease are changes in mood and anxiety. So you've got the problem of chicken and egg, but we know that throughout life, men have half the amount of depression and anxiety of women. And they have half the amount of Alzheimer's disease. So you think, is there some third common factor, hormonal factors that's causing these things, or could there be something in addition? And I think there probably is something in addition there, which is probably boils down to control. Having control. Having the capacity to make choice and be in control is a fundamental human need. And we get very distressed when we don't have control. And women across the world generally, on average, have less control than men. And feeling out of control causes depression and anxiety. And depression and anxiety are risk factors for dementia for a number of reasons, including early inflammatory processes in the brain and the body that depression can cause. And so there can be very early on, long before there might be any of the brain processes of Alzheimer's, you can get cascades of events taking place that may result in a greater vulnerability of the brain. And so in terms of what to do about this, the positive message, I have to reiterate that your booklet that everybody has here is a fantastic summary of what you can do to take control. And if you build that sense of control, particularly about your own internal mood and anxiety states, then that control in itself, together with the reduced depression and anxiety, there's a good chance that that's going to reduce your risk. Although, unfortunately, the studies haven't been done to show this yet, but it's a very good, plausible hypothesis.
You know, many people, when I first got into this space, as I said, people felt that there was nothing that could be done, and now we're talking in partnership also a lot with Equinox about trying to get these lifestyle messages out to people about what you eat, about meditation, helping with depression and anxiety. Talk a little bit, Ian, would you, about sugar? I'm weak in this space, but I think it's really important about people knowing their blood sugar levels and the connection between sugar and Alzheimer's. Because I'm trying to stay focused on things that you can actually, as I said, news you can use. So I'd just like to have you address that a little bit.
Well, I won't pretend to be an expert on this at all, and I'm sure Farida will be able to comment more accurately. Nevertheless, diabetes, for instance, which would be an extreme end of that spectrum of sugar, is a significant risk factor for dementia. And so there is a theory of Alzheimer's. Say it's a type 3 diabetes is one hypothesis about it. And for sure, I think we've underestimated the ill effects of sugar on the brain. And I think that it's, in terms of public health recommendations, I think not many people are making that link, and I think it could be a very, very tangible step that people could take.
And also, Ian, many people say to me everywhere I travel, like, well, where's the cure? Where's the cure? How far are we out from a cure? And so I said I was going to ask you that up here, because so then everybody doesn't ask me. As doctor, when I was doing the big Alzheimer's project for HBO about 8 or 9 years ago, I asked that question Dr. Dennis Salko, who we now fund at Harvard, and he said it's in a vial somewhere. So I'm going with it's in a vial somewhere, but it's not going to be a vial.
There's not going to be one silver bullet. Alzheimer's is the end stage of a whole lot of different processes, and hopefully we're going to knock off these pathways one by one. And for some people it will be a focus on the cardiovascular system, for some it will be a focus on the immune system, but it's going to be a series of, we hope, golden bullets rather than one big silver bullet.
So that just reconfirms how personalized and precise medicine is becoming, and how personalized you have to take your own care into account, because hormones may work for you but not for you. Eliminating sugar might work for you. Exercise, certain kinds of exercise. So it's very personal. Moll, you and I met really as children of Alzheimer's. Moll's mom passed away from Alzheimer's. So many people find themselves in the place you did. 17 million with this disease alone. We're entering Alzheimer's Month and Caregivers Month. What do you wish you would have known when you walked in, and what can people prepare themselves for better?
Wow. There's so much I wish I had known. I can't tell you, even though it'll be 2 years in May that my mom passed. There was so much I wish I had known to look for. And my mom and I lived in different states, which didn't help as well. But now going back and thinking over time, the way my mom learned to keep control of her life and not give up her independence was basically to tell me little white lies. And that was her way of saying, well, I can't let her know this because then I won't be able to drive anymore. And I can't let her know this because then she's not going to let me be independent in so many different ways. But what I can't even begin to tell you that I don't know if I can even prepare you for. It is so insidious what happened to my mom's brain. But it happened to me too. And I want to empower you here today to understand that it will affect you, your children, your family, your friends. And I was one of those people that wanted to keep control because that's what I was going to do. I was going to do it all myself. And when my mom was dying, I didn't reach out. I shut everybody out. Jan knows I didn't take a call. I didn't talk to Sue. I thought, I can handle this. I need to be strong. This is my mom. I don't need help. And finally, at one point, Maria, I reached out to you. And you were so kind and so thoughtful. And you gave me so many sweet words that just made me feel so much better. But I'm going to tell you this. I got scared straight. When I say scared straight, my mama wanted me to sleep with her in memory care when I came to town. She wouldn't move here. And my brother lived there, so I couldn't go. And I couldn't take everything away from her. So she, when I would come, would say, I want you to spend the night. Well, nobody spent the night in memory care, except for the patients who lived there. And I went to Bed Bath & Beyond, and I said, I can handle this, I can do this. Bought a blow-up bed, set of sheets, a pillow, and a blanket, toothbrush, and all those things you need. And I set up camp when I would be there, and I would spend the night in memory care. I wish all of you could spend a night in memory care. It is the most sobering thing you'd ever go through. When you get to wake up in the middle of the night because you're a little getting older here and you got to use the little girl's room in the middle of the night, you got to go down the hall and find the bathroom. And I would run into people who, God bless them, couldn't find their room, who were alone, completely lost. I ran into a man in the elevator, and I'll never forget it because he said to me, I don't know where I'm going. I'm so embarrassed. I'm so humiliated to tell you this. I said, no, don't be. I'm lost too. I said, my mom's staying here. I said, let's help each other. And I said, let's go down to the bottom floor. We'll ask where we're supposed to go. And we connected, and I made sure he got back to his room. And something clicked inside me, and I said, oh, my Lord, I do not want to end up this way. And I saw a lot of other things, too. But I'm telling you, at that moment, I said, I'm going to do everything I can. I mean, I can't control certain things, right? We can't control everything. I'm not getting tested because I believe that I have to be in a positive frame of mind. I have to believe that God created me to use my brain and my heart and my soul to heal my body. And so I decided I would cut out all the things that didn't help my brain. So I literally, my husband did not think I could do it. I just came home and said, I'm going paleo. And he said, well, sure you are, honey. That's just great. I cut out sugar. I cut out gluten. I cut out dairy. I cut aspartame, no xylitol, and I went cold turkey. And it'll be 2 years in June.
Two things in there. How has that affected your brain? Do you feel clearer? Do you feel different from what you did?
Well, here's the good news. You stop craving it, and you get very excited about all the wonderful natural things that God created in food. There's so many good tasting food. Food started tasting different to me. I started looking at how green the vegetables were, or how orange they were, or how red they were. And I started to visualize in a different way that I never thought possible. Then I started thinking, this is what God intended. He gave us our senses to live a fully sensory-aware life. That's what we have. It's a gift. And we teach our children by example, and you must realize that they watch everything. The sugar that they get, that we give them from the time that we're small because we feel really bad, and we try to keep them from it, but they get it from their friends. Start sharing with them alternatives and beautiful ways to cook and to eat, because it makes such a difference. I feel so much better. I can't tell you, I don't crave sugar. And if I was going to take a bite of sugar, which I did one time, I got an immediate headache. I'm going to tell you, I had a throbbing headache, Maria.
I want to ask you, because everywhere I go, I meet what I call children of Alzheimer's, and to the T, every single one of them says, I wish I had gotten my mom or my dad to the neurologist sooner. I poo-pooed when they couldn't remember this. I told them they were under stress. I told them they were fine. And as children, no matter our age, we want them to be fine. Do you identify with this? Do you wish you
Oh, yes.
had gone to the neurologist sooner? And what might be the signs that you think you could share with people? And I believe that everybody should begin with a neurologist at 50, get a cognitive baseline. Probably, I'd be interested, anybody in here done a cognitive baseline? Okay, very few. And that's scary. I did it. It's not pleasant.
No,
but
it's scary.
It's scary, but you have to ask. Once again, you have to ask for it. There's some online. You can go and take them yourself. But what might be the things that you missed looking
gosh.
back that somebody else might be experiencing and then could take their loved one or themselves?
Yes, well, my mom, like I said, was very creative in her stories. And so she worked very hard to not let me know she was missing a beat, even though I don't know to this day if she knew that it was happening to her. I knew she was frustrated and couldn't find her words. That is one of the first things my mom did looking back. She'd say, well, you know. And I'd say, well, no, Mom, I'm not really sure I do know. And she says, I just can't find my words today. You know how that happens. And it didn't even dawn on me to think that that was weird or that there could be a problem. I just thought, well, of course, she's getting older, right? Maybe she's just having trouble catching her breath and trying to remember. I mean, for goodness sakes, I can't remember some names sometimes, and I try not to go, oh my gosh, it's happening, And it's not necessarily happening. It's just that we multitask in our brains so much that it's hard for us to take in all the information properly, and I think that's one of our problems as women. But honestly, the first time I finally took my mom, I will share this with you, I thought, she can't possibly have Alzheimer's. She doesn't need to go into memory care. And I took her, and they gave her the simplest test, and it was to fill out the clock. And I thought, well, this is so cliche, right? She's gonna fill out the clock. And she was like, well, and she sat there and she was staring at it, and I'm trying so hard not to go, Mom, you know where the 12 goes, I was feeling like this is not happening. And she put a 3 where the 9 went, and then she put a 6 where the 12 went. And I just sat there, and the shock started to fill my soul, and I went, oh my Lord. And then she just sat down and she said, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And then they asked her to take another test. And that was a very simple test. Name as many farm animals as you can within so many seconds. I thought, oh, come on, this is easy. She's going to get this. And she said, goat. I said, okay. And then she goes, alligator. Alligator. And she looked and she smiled and she was so proud. And I thought, well, I'm not going to tell her that there's no alligators unless I guess there's a farm in Florida somewhere. And then she looked and she thought, and then she said, I know for sure. Aren't there ostriches there? And I just wept. And it was such a shock. And I felt so guilty and so bad that I didn't pay attention enough to understand that she was struggling and was full of pride.
Thank you for sharing that. I hear so many people in this space who say, I feel guilty years later, and that's why we're trying to inform people. So not that you don't feel guilty, that you get help, that you know that we've all been there. And this is really for many people, a new space. And it's a space where people thought Alzheimer's was a natural form and part of aging. It is not. That's a myth. I've interviewed lots of people who are in their 70s and 80s and have the brains of 30 and 40-year-olds. And it's not a normal part, and that there are things you can do. And as I said, change you can make. Cheryl, we were talking before. You said you had no real clue about the impact, particularly in the African-American community, where it's double the rate than in the Caucasian community, very fastly growing in the Latino and African-American community. What has been your experience? What do you wish you would have known? What do you think can be done?
Well, First of all, thank you for having me on the panel. Jan, I remember 2 years ago, invited me to her house, and you were speaking about it. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to go because Jan said we need to come. And so you just go, right? And so I'm sitting there, and I'm listening to you, and you said when Alzheimer's affects women. I was like, okay, well, I'm a lady. Okay, I'm going to listen to her, you know. And then when you say, but it's double in the African-American community, I mean, I literally just sat up. I'm like, wait a minute, she's fixing to drop some wisdom on me that I don't know anything about. And then when you started talking about Alzheimer's, it's then when I started going back through my own family, and I remember my grandmother. So my parents were pastors. We were pastors of faith. You pray for everything. We didn't go to doctors very much. It's just like you lay on a bed in the name of Jesus, and you will wake up and you will be healed in the name of Jesus. True story. And a lot of African Americans in this room will validate that, right? There was nothing wrong with it, but there is something wrong when you don't get help, right? And we weren't educated enough to know that there could possibly be help, or what are the signs. So when I looked back over it, I started, after you spoke, I called my nieces and my cousins, and I was like, do you remember what happened with Granny? And I remember my mother sitting at the edge of my grandmother's bed and saying my name, Mom, it's me. And my grandmother's just looking like, okay. And then I walk in, hey, Granny, and Granny doesn't recognize me. And my mother whisked me out of the room, and it was 7 of us, so she had to keep doing it over and over and over again, right? And we're like, what's wrong with Granny? She'll be okay. She'll be okay. And that was it. She will be okay. And what okay means for us is that if there isn't healing, then heaven is the final resting place, so everything's just fine. But really what okay should mean is that if she doesn't get the right help, she won't be okay. Yes, she'll make it to heaven, but we need to talk about this so the next generation and the next generation will understand it. I did not understand it. Me and my cousins later started speaking about it after I heard you speak it, Jan. I was like, wow, this is powerful. Now, what really gets me about it is because if you know me and my stand, I always talk about hunger. I'm hungry to educate people. And so I see over 100,000 people per year. And these people that I see, they need a meal. And so when I started hearing about how you eating the proper meals and being healthy in your eating habits, then I'm like, wow, that could possibly affect 100,000 lives that I see. So should I be a voice for this? And the answer was absolutely yes. And then something I heard you say earlier that I'm going to kind of have a rebuttal to. You said you won't be angry if nobody gives. I'm going to say I will be angry. I just have to tell you that. I'm going to tell you that if I'm on this stand, my gift is for me to ask for help for others who don't have a voice. And so before you leave, I will ask you to help those who can't be helped. Whether you give $1, $100, $50, I know I'm going to give. So before you leave, I'm going to ask you to put something in that little envelope that says wham, because we are women. And when we do things like she said, when we come together as one, the world shifts and things change. And today is the beginning of change because we're in this room. So clap because you decided to come in this room and make a change.
Amen.
Amen.
I knew Sue Gregg was like, I care that people will give the money. I was like, well, I care about the information. She goes, girl, get off the stage. You know, so I was like, that was last night. But I want to, I mean, I could stand up here all day long, but I want you, because I think some of you may be dealing with this in your own way. I want you to be open to asking questions about what you can do. If you've been to a neurologist, go ahead, Jan. Yeah.
I was at a luncheon, an Alzheimer's luncheon years ago, and it just hit me sitting here. And Maureen Reagan was speaking, and she was talking about her father, President Reagan. And it struck me that my mother was having some of those same symptoms. Mm-hmm. And that was very, very early on. And with that information, I became an animal-defined neurologist. I took her to Baylor, and I discovered a neurologist, as it turns out, in LSU, Dr. Rosenstein, I'll never forget him. And he was extraordinarily helpful because he said, we can slow this down. And because I did get some information early, and I discovered that from going to a luncheon like this, talking about it, I think we did slow it down. We slowed the process down. Right. We got the protocol. We got vitamin B. We got the, she wouldn't go into an Alzheimer's office because the people look so dreadful, to be honest. And so the doctors were very nice. They would put her somewhere else. And she was clever and funny, and she could kind of humor her way through. But I do think that early assault on it, it didn't cure it,
but it did slow it down.
Well,
I think we
a lot
slowed
of
it
people,
down.
Ian, could you address that? Because a lot of people tell me I can't get a neurologist, or when I do go to a neurologist, they tell me it's fine, it's normal.
Well, I went to 5 neurologists
Okay,
before
well,
I got help.
yeah, so a
you
lot
have
of
to be
people don't-
aggressive, proactive.
Okay, so a lot of people who are, I find who are
You heard
working
the same
full time.
story. There's nothing we can do. But there was things that they could do, and there was a protocol.
There's a terrible absence of hope in this domain, and there shouldn't be. There is hope. There's not a level of the condition where you cannot produce some improvement. And with cancer now, it used to be 50 years ago, if you were diagnosed with cancer, eyes were averted and heads were bowed. Now, that's not the case. You say, what kind of cancer? What can we do? There's always something to do. But that's not the case in Alzheimer's disease for many neurologists. Hopefully it will change. But it is a wrong-headed approach to say, oh God, sorry, you're diagnosed. There's nothing we can do. There's always something you can do, as you have illustrated there.
So I think that's just some, words of advice.
Yeah, and the one thing that the Women's Alzheimer's Movement is trying to do is to reach women in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, because we've learned now that the brain does continue. The brain begins to change at 30 and 40, but there are things you can do today that grow your brain, that train your brain, that change your brain, that you could be pushing off something like Alzheimer's or another form of dementia 5, 6, 7 years. I mean, that's very new to note that people, Farida, that the brain, many people tell me we were taught in medical school that the brain forms and then that's it. And now we know, oh my God, it's continuing to grow.
There is what's called plasticity. The brain continues to be plastic and responds to the environment. So exercise, the reason why exercise works is it actually increases levels of growth factors. And these growth factors affect your brain. The sugar problem, for example, we know that diabetes, for example, will decrease how much blood gets to your brain eventually, and the fact that it will activate your immune system. All of these things hurt the brain. The brain is a very delicate organ, but it's also very resilient in some ways. And so the point that was made earlier about early intervention is really, really critical. It's also, I wanted to make one other point that came up when I was listening to all of you talk is when it comes to your health is one of the only places I'm in favor of a little stereotyping, okay? And I say this because the paths to Alzheimer's disease are going to be different for different ethnicities. We see this in stroke, which is a disease I study. In stroke, typically the risk factor for African American populations is hypertension. In Hispanic Latino populations, it ends up being type 2 diabetes. In Caucasians, it ends up being atherosclerosis, so fat deposits literally in your blood vessels. So that's another avenue in which you can act preemptively. If you know that you are within a community with a specific risk factor, make sure that gets taken off first. Even if you are, say for example, African American and your blood pressure is exactly at 140/90, make sure that it's as good as it can possibly be, because hypertension is a big risk factor. So these are the early interventions you can make from the point of view of your doctor and your own medical cases. The aspect that you all stressed on community and control and reaching out, those are across the board. Everybody needs to do that.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Pat.
So I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's. But can someone speak to the genetic component of this?
Right.
So as a grandchild or the daughter?
Go ahead.
There is a small proportion of Alzheimer's disease that is due to genetic basis, but it only explains about 5% of the population. What we don't have a full understanding of are genetic risk factors. Now, those risk factors can, under the right, or shall I say wrong circumstances, allow for the disease to occur more rapidly. But under the correct circumstances, or where you are aware of them, and say, for example, risk factors for diabetes. If you have those risk factors, you modify your diet aggressively, you've abated those risk factors. So the true genetic susceptibility exists, but it's very small. What we do have are these risk factors.
Go ahead.
What about the issue probably of APOE?
Yes, so ApoE, which is what you're referring to, is a cholesterol transporter. And if you have a variant, and if you're a woman, you're more likely to get the disease. So that's one of those unfortunate intersections of genetics and your sex, essentially.
Just following up on that, I have found that doctors are unwilling because testing for APOE in your blood is not a typical blood test. That I actually asked the doctor to do it, and he refused to do it because of issues of,
The implications.
the implications of that, and so therefore didn't want there to be a record that perhaps you had APOE and the effects of that on your future insurance and
Yes.
all of that.
So that's always going to be a problem, and especially now with the rapid growth of things like 23andMe and Ancestry.com, where all of our genetic information is out there. It depends on what kind of doctor you go to for this information. So your best bet is not an internist or a neurologist, but a geneticist, a genetic counselor, because that is a team approach. They will do the blood work for you, they will take a history, but there will also be counseling. Because when you get the information, you really need to know how to deal with this.
So should women do that?
That is a very, very personal question. Yes, there are individuals that I know whose family has Alzheimer's disease, and they've made the decision not to test.
But
And
the big misnomer, isn't it, Farida, that if you have Alzheimer's, people in your family, people think, oh, I'm definitely going to get it. And they think if it's not in your family, I'm definitely not going to get it. Both are incorrect.
They're both incorrect.
That's why I tried to say at the very beginning that all of us should be concerned about our brain and the fact that this begins to develop in our brains 20 years before we're symptomatic. So there are things that, we're in a hurry. Everybody in here should be in a hurry to try to understand their bodies and their brains, understand what food does to them, understand how they're different, and to be your advocate. As someone said to me the other day, you got to know what your car is. You got to know how it drives, and got to know that everybody's got a different car, but you got to get really smart about what makes your car run effectively.
That's a great analogy to make. Yes, and I think it's worth mentioning that the majority of cases of Alzheimer's disease and most dementias is a word called sporadic and an even sillier word called idiopathic. And idiopathic simply means we really don't know how you got it, but here you are. It doesn't have a known genetic basis. So yes, taking care of the car is great advice.
Right. Any other questions? Doctor, go ahead.
Along the lines of testing, I remember you've addressed this in the past, but if you do have the test, either way, if the precursor shows that you do have the tendency, or if you don't, is it incorrect to say that that doesn't designate that either way that's determinative? Is that
Right.
correct?
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
It's not foolproof.
Right,
There
no,
really
that's what I
isn't a
understand,
single
right.
test, with the exception of ApoE4 in women and a double variant at that. There isn't a foolproof test. Many of us, including myself, were looking for biomarkers, predictive biomarkers. But the reality is many of them can be changed with other lifestyle factors as well. Yes.
Because I think that's the fear, and I know
Right.
you've addressed it in the past,
Yeah.
Ray, when you decided yourself whether you should be tested or not, because people are afraid to be tested because they're afraid if I'm positive, then it's determinative, and that's
Right.
not correct.
Right, so I do a lot of this reporting at NBC, and I do talk about that. But what I've also learned that as much as I do talk about all of this, there's a huge gap in the public's knowledge about what this actually is and what they can do to help themselves or someone they love. You wanted to say something, Moll?
So I just wanted to say this because I did decide not to get tested. And what I really thought about was no matter what happens, there's so many diseases out there that take place. And yes, there's always a chance because my mom had Alzheimer's and my birth father did have Alzheimer's too, I just recently found out. But don't I need to take control of my health? don't I need to decide that I'm important enough to stop making excuses for not exercising, to stop making excuses for multitasking to the point where I'm not really living in the moment, that I'm taxing my brain every single time I'm trying to do this and get to here and try and take care of the kids and the grandkids. And finally, it just hit me. I have to do it. I have to do it. And even though I made the diet change and all of that, I still wasn't following through on everything else. I thought, wow, I'm really doing good not eating sugar. But I really realized that it's more than that, like you're saying. We have to decide that we are important and stop not making appointments for exercise, for community. And I just want to say one thing and then I'll stop. I believe God led me to Dallas. You know why? Because I used to be an isolator. I really did. And I was much more alone in my thinking and felt like, this is just the way my life was. When I moved to Dallas, the community of girlfriends, the women that I met here, the people, the gentlemen, everyone, has been so good for my soul. This is a very special place, and it feeds my soul to know you all. It feeds my soul and heals so much. And it lifts me to a whole different place. I'm telling you, don't underestimate what a laugh with a girlfriend means, or sharing time with someone you want to get to know because you know they're special. Think about that, because that's healing. And it's a gift from God.
Let me just add on to that. So I went somewhere with Jan and Moll, and we were in California, and I was getting ready to order my double cheeseburger with bacon and all the works, because that's just who I am. And Moll and Jan go, "Oh no, you won't." And I said, "We're gonna order for you." And the next thing I know, there's this piece of lettuce sitting. I don't even remember what it was.
It was a lettuce wrap burger.
Okay, a lettuce wrap
with
burger.
no cheese.
But sharing is caring, right? So they cared enough to share with me that I needed to eat better, right? So then I come home and I'm trying to get this same little thing going on in my house. Now, we ain't 100% there, but we're on the way. And it just made me feel good that at least one meal I had that was really, really good and healthy. So I think that if nothing else comes out of this for you, is that we just take this information and we begin to share it. And if we share it, it multiplies. And that's what the goal is, to say, just do one little thing that could possibly prevent you from getting this crazy disease. Because I stress out a lot. That's one of the things. I work a lot. That's one of the things. I don't eat properly. That's one of the things. I'm like, dang, I'm doing everything that could possibly
Girl, you're
get
feeding the world. Stop.
Right.
And take a meal in between.
Right. So, but I'm saying that's how.
Healthy meal.
But this is how I'm learning, and that's what I want us all to do, is to learn and share. I will stand before 100,000 people this year, and I will share, and I will find out how we can raise money, that if there's a test or if there's one thing that I can tell them to promise me that they will do to prevent this disease. Exercise. And if we have to do an exercise class all out in our parking lot so you can see us, follow us. It will happen. It will happen, and that's what I want you to do, is just share and care.
I think also, just like what Moll shared, that she was an isolator, right? Or that what Maria stood up here and said, my car was repossessed, I'm in debt, and she's standing here in a nice dress and pearls. One thing I've learned as a journalist is that we never know. We never know. And for some reason, people often tell me their stories. My kids are always like, could you stop talking to people about their stories? But I find again and again, as I walk through airports, people tell me they're an isolator. People tell me they're in debt and they're dressed really nice. And they tell me then they got their clothes from Dress for Success or someplace else. And, we live in a really fast-paced world. Everybody thinks, we're comparing ourselves all the time, but if you reach out, that perhaps is one of the best gifts you can give another human being, is to invite them out and in. Go ahead. What was that, Jan?
Which question did I want to ask? Which question did you want me to ask, Jan? Oh, I had a question, but she actually touched on it. It was about the DNA testing and how reliable is that?
Okay. Well, he's going to do a
Oh.
rap thing in a minute.
I'm gonna do a rap. Sure. I am Kevin Curry, and I'm the founder of Fit Men Cook. It's a healthy eating community, and I'm not thanks. And I'm not an absolutist or like a purist when it comes to food. I think that food should be enjoyed. It's just about eating it in the right portions. And you can have your pizza Maria whenever you come to Dallas. Just maybe we can do a different type of pizza, like a flatbread, or your burger.
I did gluten-free.
We can do a quinoa burger next time.
She
for
did
you
get
as
a
well.
gluten-free pizza. I'm just saying. She
Okay,
did.
we're excited about that. So
Yeah.
that's what I actually do.
I want to thank you. And Ian, I just want people to leave because I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. Are you hopeful? I call myself a cultivator of hope. I believe that this is going to be wiped out in my lifetime. As I said in the beginning, I'm in a hurry. Back me up.
Heart disease killed 40% of the heart disease that we had 50 years ago. Cancer is being knocked off disease by disease. We will do it, but we need, as you said, we need the funding. A fraction of the funding goes to Alzheimer's compared to cancer, so it's as you say, it's a political issue. If we get the funding, we will do it.
And we've just done just to speak to that, and then I'm going to turn it, that, as I said, this is a political issue. I'm not saying Democrat or Republican, but please vote for people who care about caregiving. Many people will tell you, that they work for companies that have no caregiving policy, that have no flexible work hours. It's impossible. The American family has changed. Both parents work. People are caring. They're caring from far away. They're caring up close. Find a neurologist. And if a neurologist says we don't know anything, we can't do anything, find another one. Stay at it. Be dogged. It really is up to all of us. And if we find a cure, I can materialize what he said that he thinks I do, be on a yacht with a bunch of men. That will happen when I wipe this out, so let's get going, because I need a man and I need a yacht. So let's move it along. Thank you all.